The city was alive with light, but his small apartment was always dark. Daniel was a middle-aged man who had stopped counting birthdays. His work was simple, his meals were simple, and his nights were long and lonely. In a world full of technology, robots, and endless entertainment, he still felt empty. One evening, Daniel walked through the lower markets of the city. The stalls were crowded, selling things from other worlds, strange fruits, glowing crystals, and cages filled with creatures no human had ever seen before. The air smelled of oil, smoke, and something sweet. People shouted prices, bargained, and laughed. But Daniel walked slowly without joy, his hands in his coat pockets. Then he saw it. Behind a glass case, sitting quietly, was what the vendor called a pleasure pet. The words made Daniel frown. He had heard of them but never cared to see one up close. Everyone said they were nothing more than living dolls, beautiful, obedient, created only to serve human pleasure. But this one was different. It looked human. A young woman with long, dark hair falling across her shoulders, her skin pale in the cold light of the lamps. Her eyes were lowered, but they moved slightly, following shapes in the crowd. Her hands rested on her lap, but he could see her fingers twitch as if she wanted to reach out and touch the world beyond the glass. Daniel stopped walking. The vendor smiled, seeing a possible customer. "Good choice, sir," the man said. "This one is new, very quiet, very obedient. She will not trouble you. Strong body, soft skin, no sickness, no trouble. Perfect for company." Daniel felt uncomfortable with the words. Still, he couldn't move away. The woman, no, the pet, lifted her eyes for just a second. And in that second, Daniel saw something strange. Her eyes were not empty. They were watching. He told himself he was imagining it. Pets had no real mind. Everyone knew that. They were bred or built for service, nothing more. But when she looked at him, Daniel felt a weight in his chest. It was not attraction alone, it was recognition, as if she wanted to say something but could not. "How much?" Daniel asked without thinking. The vendor named a price that was too high. Daniel should have walked away. He should have told himself it was madness. But that night he went home with the pet. The apartment felt even smaller now. She stood silently near the door, waiting for instructions. Daniel placed his coat on the chair and rubbed his face with tired hands. "You can sit," he said. She obeyed, moving with quiet grace, sitting on the old sofa. Her eyes looked around the room, the cracked walls, the broken lamp, the empty shelves. She did not speak. Pets did not speak. Daniel made himself some tea. He poured water into a cup for her, unsure if she even needed it. She took the cup carefully, like it was something precious. She held it close but did not drink. That night, Daniel lay in his bed, listening to the city hum outside. The neon signs blinked through the window. He closed his eyes, telling himself he had made a mistake. He had bought a pet out of loneliness. Nothing more, but then, a sound, soft, almost like a whisper. Daniel sat up, his heart beating fast. The sound came from the sofa where she slept. He listened. She was talking. The words were strange, not human, not in any language he knew. A whisper, fast and broken like a dream she could not control. Daniel froze. Pets did not dream. Pets did not speak in unknown tongues. The whisper stopped. She turned in her sleep, her face calm again, almost too calm, like a mask. Daniel could not sleep after that. In the morning, he watched her as she moved around the room. She looked at the books on the shelf, touching one with careful fingers. She picked up a photo of Daniel's younger self, holding it with silent curiosity. Daniel spoke without thinking. "Do you understand this?" She turned her head, her lips parting slightly, but no words came. Then she lowered the photo almost guiltily and went back to sit quietly. Daniel rubbed his temples. He told himself it was nothing. Just programming, just reflex. But deep inside, a thought began to grow. What if she was more? That night, as the city lights burned outside, Daniel looked at her again. He told himself she was only a pet, nothing more. But her eyes, when they met his, did not look like the eyes of a pet. They looked like the eyes of someone waiting for a chance. And in that moment, Daniel knew. His life had changed. Forever. Daniel tried to tell himself it was nothing. The whispering in the night, the strange look in her eyes, it could not mean anything. She was only a pet, a product, a thing made for company. That was what the world believed, and he had no proof to think otherwise. But deep inside, he could not forget that sound, the way she had spoken as if words came from her dreams. The days passed slowly. Daniel went to work in the mornings, leaving her in the apartment. When he came back, she would be waiting, sitting in the same place, quiet and obedient. She never asked for anything, never made demands, never spoke. And yet, Daniel began to notice small details. She watched him. When he cooked, her eyes followed his hands as if memorizing every movement. When he read, she leaned slightly forward, her gaze locked on the words. Once, when Daniel dropped a spoon, she bent down quickly, picking it up before he could. Her hand trembled slightly, but her grip was firm. It was not the action of a machine. It was the reflex of someone who cared. Daniel tried to ignore it. But the more he saw, the more the thought grew. One evening, Daniel returned home earlier than usual. He opened the door quietly. Inside, the room was not silent as it always was. She was standing near the shelf, one of his books in her hands. The book was open, her eyes scanning the page. Her lips moved as if she was trying to sound out the words. Daniel froze. Pets did not read. Pets could not read. She noticed him suddenly and dropped the book, stepping back like a guilty child caught in a secret. Daniel picked up the book, his hands shaking. He looked at her. "You can read?" She shook her head quickly, lowering her eyes. Her fingers twisted nervously together. Daniel felt a chill. He wanted to believe it was an accident. But then he remembered the whisper in the night. That same night it happened again. Daniel lay awake, listening. Around midnight, the whispering began. Soft, broken like wind through an old pipe. He stood slowly, walking to the sofa where she lay. Her eyes were closed, her face calm. But her lips moved. Daniel leaned closer. This time he caught something. A word. It was not English. It was not any language he knew. But it was clear, sharp, repeated like a prayer. Daniel felt his stomach twist. He whispered, almost afraid of his own voice. "Can you hear me?" Her lips stopped moving. Her eyes opened. For a long moment, she just stared at him. Her eyes were wide, not empty like a doll, but full of awareness. Daniel stepped back, his heart racing. Then she did something no pet should ever do. She spoke. Daniel. The word was soft, broken, like she had pulled it from the depths of her throat. But it was real. She had said his name. Daniel felt his legs weaken. He sat down hard on the edge of the sofa. How do you know my name?" he asked, his voice shaking. She looked at him, her lips trembling. Then slowly she shook her head as if she could not explain. Daniel rubbed his face, trying to breathe. Everything he had believed was breaking apart. Pets were not supposed to think, not supposed to speak, not supposed to know. But she did. The next days were different. She moved more carefully, as if she knew he had discovered her secret. She still sat quietly, still obeyed when he spoke, but her eyes were alive now, brighter, filled with something she could no longer hide. Daniel began testing her. He left books on the table. Sometimes, when he came back, the pages were turned. He left objects in different places and found them moved. He asked simple questions, watching her reaction, and slowly he saw the truth. She understood. But if she was more than a pet, then what was she? At night, Daniel lay awake thinking. If the company knew she could think, they would take her back, erase her, or worse. If the world found out, they would call her dangerous. And yet, when Daniel looked at her, he did not see danger. He saw fear. He saw a being trapped in silence, forced to pretend to be less than she truly was. One evening, as the city lights blinked outside, Daniel spoke again. "Do you want freedom?" he asked carefully. She lifted her eyes to his. Her lips parted. For a long moment, no sound came. Then very softly, she whispered one word. "Yes." Daniel's heart pounded. His world had already changed when he bought her. But now it was no longer about loneliness or company. Now it was about a secret that could destroy them both. The next morning, Daniel sat at his small table, a cold cup of coffee in front of him. His hands were still shaking. He kept hearing her voice in his mind. One word, one impossible word. Yes, she had answered him. She had spoken. Across the room, she sat silently on the sofa, her eyes lowered as always. But now Daniel knew the truth. The silence was not emptiness. It was control. It was survival. He wanted answers. He wanted to know who or what she really was. But how could he ask without frightening her? Finally, he pushed the cup aside and stood. "You can speak," he said softly. Her head lifted. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "You said my name," Daniel continued, stepping closer. "You said yes. I know you can do it again." She looked at him with wide, fearful eyes. Her fingers twisted nervously. For a long time, she said nothing. Daniel almost gave up. But then her lips moved again. "Yes," she whispered. Daniel's heart jumped. He knelt in front of her. Why? Why hide it? Why pretend? She shook her head. Then she raised her hand slowly, touching her throat as if words were trapped there, broken. "Not safe," she whispered. Daniel frowned. "Not safe? What do you mean?" Her eyes flicked toward the window, toward the city beyond the glass. Then she lowered her gaze again, her shoulders trembling. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He kept remembering her voice, so fragile, so human. He needed to know the truth. He needed to push further. The next day he tried again. He placed a notebook on the table and set a pen beside it. "Write," he said gently. She hesitated, looking at the notebook as if it were forbidden. Then slowly she picked up the pen. Her hand shook, but the lines she drew were not random. Symbols, letters, a strange language. Daniel leaned forward. "What is this?" She whispered, "My words, her language." Daniel stared at the page, the alien symbols curving like music across the paper. His skin prickled. She was not just a pet. She was something more, something hidden. Over the next days he kept asking, and she gave him pieces, small broken pieces of her past. "I was free," she whispered one night. "Not made, not born for cage." Daniel froze. "You mean you were taken?" Her eyes filled with tears. She nodded. "Taken, sold." Daniel's heart twisted. All his life he had believed the company's story, that these beings were created in labs shaped for service without true thought or soul. But now he saw the truth. She was not made. She was stolen, from somewhere out there, a world beyond his reach. The more he learned, the more dangerous it became. Daniel began to notice things in the city. Flyers about defective pets. Warnings on the news about pets showing unwanted behaviors. The company promised to collect and correct them. People laughed about it, treating it like broken toys being recalled. But Daniel knew what correction meant. It meant erasing her. One evening, she sat by the window, watching the neon signs outside. Her voice was soft, almost broken. "My name," she whispered. Daniel leaned closer. "What is it?" She spoke a word he could barely repeat, sharp and flowing at the same time. It did not sound human at all. Daniel tried to say it back. She smiled faintly, her first real smile since he had met her. Then she whispered again. "But they took it." Said no, said I am. Property. Daniel's chest ached. He had never felt so angry at the world. To take a name was to take a life. "You're not property," he said firmly. "Not to me." Her eyes met his. For the first time she looked at him not with fear but with trust. But trust was dangerous. One night Daniel returned home to find the apartment door slightly open. His stomach turned to ice. He pushed the door carefully. Inside, 2 men in dark uniforms stood near the sofa. She was kneeling on the floor, silent, her head bowed. "Sir," one man said, his voice flat. "Routine check. We received a report. Just making sure your unit is functioning." Daniel forced a smile. His heart thundered in his chest. "She's fine. Very obedient. Never any trouble." The man studied her carefully. "If you notice strange behavior, you must report it. Malfunctions can be dangerous." Daniel nodded quickly. "Of course." After they left, he locked the door with shaking hands. She looked at him, her body trembling. "Not safe," she whispered again. And Daniel finally understood. The secret was bigger than he imagined. She was not only more than a pet. She was a survivor, and the past she carried could destroy them both. The apartment no longer felt the same. Before, it had been quiet, empty, just a place for Daniel to sleep and survive. Now it felt alive because of her. Every day she revealed something new. At first it was small things. She touched objects with gentle care, curious about everything. A book, a spoon, a piece of clothing. Each item seemed like treasure to her. She studied them as if the world had been hidden from her for years. Daniel began leaving things out on purpose. A notebook, a magazine, an old hollow screen. She always explored them in silence, but her eyes shone with secret life. One evening, Daniel came home to find her in the kitchen. She stood by the stove holding a pan in her hands. The smell of burnt eggs filled the air. "What are you doing?" Daniel asked in shock. She looked at him with wide eyes like a child caught doing something forbidden. "Help," she whispered. Daniel hurried forward, taking the pan before the smoke alarm rang. He laughed despite himself. "You're trying to cook?" She nodded slowly. "Learn from you." For the first time, Daniel did not feel only pity or fear. He felt warmth. She wanted to learn, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Over the next weeks, they began to share small pieces of life together. Daniel showed her how to boil water, how to use the old hollow screen, even how to fold clothes. She watched carefully and then she copied him, almost perfectly. Sometimes, when he sat reading, she sat beside him with her own book, whispering the words under her breath. When he drank tea, she copied his movements, sipping slowly even if she did not enjoy the taste. It was not obedience. It was bonding, and Daniel felt it deep inside. He was no longer alone. One night, while the city outside glowed with neon, Daniel found her looking at the old photographs on his wall. Pictures of his younger self smiling with people long gone. She touched one photo gently. "Family?" she asked in her soft, broken voice. Daniel froze. It was the first time she had asked him a question. "Yes," he said quietly, "but they're gone now." She lowered her hand, her face calm but her eyes full of quiet sadness. "Alone," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Yes, alone." She turned to him then, and for the first time she reached out, her hand trembling but real. She placed it gently on his arm. "Not now." Daniel's chest tightened. He could not speak. For years he had been a ghost in his own life. And now someone, something the world called a pet, was reminding him that he was not truly alone. But joy lived side by side with danger. Daniel noticed patrol drones flying more often near his street. He saw company posters warning citizens to report unusual pets. He overheard people laughing about neighbors whose pets had been taken away. At night, he locked the door twice. Still, in the quiet safety of the apartment, their bond grew stronger. He taught her jokes. She laughed softly, her laughter awkward but beautiful. He showed her music and she swayed gently, closing her eyes as if the sounds carried her far away. One evening, she surprised him by humming. The melody was strange, not human, but hauntingly beautiful. Daniel listened, his heart aching. "What is that song?" he asked, her eyes lowered. "Home," she whispered. The word stayed with him. Home. She had one once. She had lost it. And now maybe she was searching for a new one. Daniel found himself watching her in a different way. Not as a pet, not even as a secret, but as someone with her own soul. He saw her fear when the outside world came close. He saw her joy when she discovered something new. He saw her kindness when she touched his arm to remind him he wasn't alone. And slowly, he felt something dangerous. He felt love. He tried to push it down. It was impossible. Wrong. Against the law, against society. If anyone discovered the truth, both of them would suffer. She could be erased. He could be imprisoned. But love does not listen to rules. Every time she looked at him with trust in her eyes, his walls broke a little more. Every time she whispered his name in the dark, his heart answered. Daniel told himself he would protect her, whatever it cost. And as the city lights flickered outside, he realized something else. He no longer cared what the world thought. For the first time in years, Daniel was alive, and it was because of her. The city was never quiet. Drones floated overhead, their red lights blinking as they scanned the streets. Loudspeakers reminded citizens of rules. Report any unusual pet behavior. Keep your units controlled. Safety is your duty. Daniel tried to ignore the warnings. He tried to pretend life inside his apartment was safe. But deep inside, he knew the world outside was getting closer every day. One evening, he returned home to find her sitting by the window, her face pale. "What's wrong?" he asked. She pointed to the sky. A drone had stopped near their building, its red eye glowing, scanning slowly from window to window. Daniel pulled the curtain shut, his hands shaking. "It's nothing. Just routine," but he knew it was not routine. Drones did not hover that long unless they suspected something. She whispered softly, "Not safe." Daniel sat down, his mind racing. He had promised to protect her, but how long could he keep that promise? The next day, danger knocked on his door. Literally. 3 loud knocks echoed through the apartment. Daniel froze. She looked at him, fear clear in her eyes. "Stay quiet," Daniel whispered. He opened the door slowly. 2 inspectors stood outside, wearing black uniforms with the company's silver logo. Their eyes were cold, their hands resting near scanners at their belts. "Routine inspection," one said flatly. "We've had reports of defective pets in this district." Daniel forced a calm smile. "Of course. Come in." They stepped inside, scanning the room with sharp eyes. One of them pulled out a device, waving it slowly. It beeped, flashing green. "Where is your unit?" the second man asked. Daniel's chest tightened. She stood by the sofa, head lowered, silent and still, just as she had learned to pretend. "There," Daniel said carefully. "She's quiet. Never any trouble." The inspector walked toward her. He circled her slowly, like a hunter around prey. He touched her arm, lifted her chin roughly. Her eyes stayed down, but Daniel could see her hands trembling. The inspector frowned. "She looks aware." Daniel's heart pounded. "She's obedient," he said quickly. "Maybe she just learns faster than others. But she follows orders always." The inspector's eyes narrowed. He pressed the scanner to her neck. The device beeped green again. He pulled it back. He muttered. "She's clean. But if you notice anything unusual, anything at all, you must report it. Defective units can be dangerous. Understand?" Daniel nodded stiffly. "Yes, I understand." After a long pause, the inspectors finally left. The door closed. Daniel leaned against it, his legs weak. She was still trembling by the sofa. "They almost," Daniel whispered, unable to finish the sentence. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "They know," she whispered. That night, Daniel could not sleep. Every sound outside made his heart jump. Every shadow felt like a threat. She sat silently in the corner, hugging her knees, her face hidden. Finally, Daniel spoke. "You have to hide better. They can't know what you are." She looked up slowly. Her voice was soft but firm. "I hide always, but they..." "Sicher?" Daniel clenched his fists. "Then I'll protect you. I won't let them take you." But he knew promises were weak against the power of the company. The following days were worse. Drones circled the neighborhood more often. People whispered about pets disappearing. Daniel heard that one neighbor's unit had been taken in the middle of the night. "Defective," they said. No one saw it again. Daniel became paranoid. He covered the windows, changed his routines, kept the lights low. But the more he tried to hide, the more obvious it felt. One evening, he returned to find her practicing words in front of the mirror, whispering Daniel's name over and over. He rushed to her, panic in his voice. "Stop! You can't. If anyone hears..." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "I want to be me." Daniel froze. His heart ached. She wasn't just afraid. She was fighting to hold on to herself. He placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "You will. But not here." "Not yet," her voice broke. "Then when?" Daniel had no answer. The very next day, another letter arrived. An official notice stamped with the company seal. Mandatory inspection. Failure to comply will result in collection. Daniel stared at the words. His stomach turning to stone. They were coming back. This time, they wouldn't leave without her. The letter lay on the table, heavy as a stone. Mandatory inspection. Failure to comply will result in collection. Daniel stared at it for hours. His tea went cold. His food sat untouched. The words burned into his mind. Collection. He knew what it meant. She would be taken, tested, wiped, or destroyed. Across the room she sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She watched him with calm eyes, but Daniel could see the fear hiding inside. Finally, she whispered, "They come." Daniel nodded slowly. Yes, they're coming. For a long time, the silence was heavy. The city's hum outside felt louder, the neon lights flickering like warning signs. Then she spoke again, her voice trembling. "Will you give me to them?" Daniel's heart twisted. He looked at her, at the being the world called a pet, but who had become his only companion, his only light. Her eyes were not empty. They were alive, full of pain and hope. "No," Daniel said firmly. "I won't," but the words felt thin. Saying no was easy. Protecting her was not. That night, Daniel sat by the window watching the drones drift across the sky. His mind was a storm. He had two choices. He could give her up. Obey the law. Keep himself safe, or he could fight for her. Risk everything. He thought of his empty years before she came. The long nights, the silence, the loneliness that had eaten away at him. And then he thought of her quiet curiosity, her awkward laughter, the way she whispered his name when the world was asleep. Without her, he would be a ghost again, he whispered to himself. I can't lose her. The next morning, he began to plan. He searched the old data nets, digging through forgotten forums and hidden messages. He found whispers of places outside the city, colonies where pets were not slaves but free beings, secret groups that smuggled them out, hiding them far from the company's reach. It sounded like rumor, maybe even lies, but it was hope. When she saw him packing a small bag, her eyes widened. What are you doing? We're leaving, Daniel said. She shook her head quickly, fear in her voice. Danger. Too dangerous. Daniel took her hand gently. If we stay, they'll take you. If we leave, we might have a chance. She looked down at their joined hands. Slowly she nodded. Together, she whispered. The days that followed were filled with quiet preparation. Daniel gathered food, old credits, and a map of the city's underground tunnels. He spoke little, his mind heavy with worry. She helped in silence, watching him with trust that cut deep into his heart. But the fear never left. Every knock at the door made them freeze. Every drone that hovered nearby made their breath catch. One night, as they sat in the dark, she touched his arm. Daniel, she whispered, yes? If we run, you lose everything. Your home, your life, you lose all. Daniel looked at her, his chest aching. None of that matters. Without you, I have nothing anyway. Her eyes softened. She leaned closer, resting her forehead gently against his. For the first time, Daniel realized how close they had become. She was no longer just a secret. She was his world, but the city would not wait. The day of inspection arrived. A loud knock shook the door. Open company inspection? Daniel's blood turned cold. He looked at her. She looked at him. This was the moment. She whispered, choice. Daniel stood, his fists clenched. His heart thundered like a drum. He knew what he had to do. He grabbed the bag, pulled her close, and whispered, We're going now. The knocking grew louder. Voices shouted. Daniel opened the back window, helping her climb down the fire escape. Alarms began to blare. The inspectors were breaking in. The night swallowed them as they ran through the narrow alleys, their footsteps echoing on wet stone. Drones buzzed above, scanning the darkness. Daniel's lungs burned, but he did not stop. Because this was no longer just escape, it was love, it was his choice. The night swallowed them whole. Daniel and her ran through the narrow streets, their breath sharp, their footsteps quick. Behind them, alarms screamed and drones buzzed like angry wasps. Every shadow felt like danger. Every second felt like their last. But they did not stop. They reached the edge of the city. Beyond the fences lay the wastelands, dark, broken ground where few dared to walk. The company's control was weaker there. Daniel helped her climb through a torn section of the fence, then followed. The city lights shrank behind them, fading like dying stars. They were free for the moment. But freedom was fragile. They walked all night. The wasteland stretched wide, silent and cold. Strange shapes moved in the distance, but none came close. Daniel held her hand tightly, guiding her across cracked stone and twisted metal ruins. At dawn, they found shelter in an old factory. The roof was broken and the walls leaned dangerously, but it was enough. They collapsed inside, exhausted. For a long time, neither spoke. Daniel lay on the floor, his chest rising and falling. She sat beside him, her hand still holding his. Finally, she whispered, Safe? Daniel nodded weakly. For now, the days that followed were hard. They had little food, little water. Daniel's body grew tired, but he pushed himself forward. Each time he looked at her, he found strength again. She never complained, never slowed. She walked beside him, silent but strong, as if her will alone carried them forward. One evening, after hours of silence, she whispered, Why? Why risk all for me? Daniel stopped walking. He turned to her, his face tired but his eyes fierce. Because you're not a pet. You're not property. You're you and I—" His voice broke. "I can't lose you." Her eyes filled with tears. She touched his face gently, her voice trembling. "Daniel, I am yours." Daniel shook his head. "No, you're not mine. You're free. But if you choose, I want to stand beside you. Not as owner, not as master, but as—" He swallowed hard. "As husband." Her breath caught. For a moment she said nothing. Then she whispered a word, soft and fragile. "Yes." They walked for days more, following rumors Daniel had read in hidden forums. Finally, one night they saw a faint glow in the distance. Not the harsh neon of the city, but warm light, steady and human. They approached carefully. Figures appeared from the shadows. Men and women, some human, some alien, some who looked like her. They carried weapons, but their eyes were kind. One of them stepped forward. "You've come far," he said. "You're safe now. This is the colony." Daniel's chest filled with relief. At last they had reached it. Life in the colony was different. No cages, no chains. Beings like her walked freely, speaking their true names, living their true lives. Daniel saw her change before his eyes. Her voice grew stronger, her words clearer. She laughed more, learned faster, and for the first time walked with her head high. One evening, in a quiet hall filled with candles, Daniel stood with her. People gathered around, smiling. She wore a simple dress, nothing like the false beauty the company had given her. Her hair was loose, her eyes bright. She looked at Daniel not with fear, but with love. The elder of the colony spoke the words of joining. Simple words. Honest words. Daniel took her hands in his, and she whispered in her true voice, clear and steady. "Yes. No longer a pet. No longer a slave, a wife." After the ceremony, Daniel and she walked outside together. The sky was wide and full of stars. She looked up, her face glowing. "Home," she whispered. Daniel wrapped his arm around her. Yes, home. For a moment, all the fear, all the running, all the danger faded. All that remained was the two of them, side by side. But Daniel knew the world had not ended. The company still ruled the cities. The drones still hunted. Danger would always be near. Yet as he looked at her, as he felt her hand in his, he knew it no longer mattered. Because humanity was not only about control and conquest. Sometimes it was about love. And in that truth, Daniel had found something greater than safety. He had found a reason to live.